Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for the work you do. It's incredible. I've read a lot about it. Why don't we start with you introducing yourself and the work that you do?
Okay. So my name is Mike Ferriss, and I'm the director of the Citizens Commission on Human Rights here in New Zealand. And the work that we do is we expose abuse of human rights in the field of psychiatry and mental health.
Right.
And the group has been going internationally since 1969 and in New Zealand since 1975.
Okay.
It was originally established by the Church of Scientology and Thomas Sars, who was a psychiatrist in New York City.
Okay. How long have you been involved for?
About 30 years.
Wow.
Doing hands-on work. I haven't been the director for that long, but certainly working with CCHR for that period.
You must have come across some crazy, I guess, abuse stories and incidents and all sorts.
Very crazy. Very, very crazy. Some might think that New Zealand was a backwater in psychiatry.
Right.
And I'd have to say that that is not the case from our research. That we were performing lobotomies in 1943, which was very early. And in fact, a US lieutenant colonel came over here around that time to perform a couple of lobotomies in Porirua Hospital, kind of showing how it's done. And lobotomies were an experimental form of psychiatry and a very damaging process. People would turn out like zombies.
Wow.
After a lobotomy. And you can read the medical journals on that subject, and it's unbelievable, but they talk about cures. Except their cures, the person, if you read the descriptions carefully, they've lost all characteristics and passion and so forth. Essentially, the goal of psychiatry, if you look into it, is to quieten people down.
Right.
It's to push them into states of apathy where they're no longer loud or aggressive. I mean, you can't be too happy in this world. You can't be too sad, according to psychiatry.
It's true.
If you are, there's something wrong with you. There's probably a diagnosis even that would apply to you.
Yeah, that's probably where the tall poppy syndrome stems from. That guy's too happy.
Yeah, for sure. But the dangerous thing about psychiatry is that they do have a diagnosis for these behaviors, and they do have a treatment. And standard today is drugs.
Right.
The psychotropic, mind-altering drugs are the standard form of treatment.
And is that what you mostly focus on, the drug-based abuse, or is it physical abuse, or is it?
Oh, it's all kinds. It's all kinds.
Right.
All the horrors of psychiatry. I mean, you don't see lobotomies anymore. But you do see violent restraint. You do see the use of seclusion and putting people into cells. And for a mentally unwell person, that can be devastating.
Right.
You punishing use of forced drugging, injections, holding people down. This is all quite in use today in any mental health unit in this country.
Do they still do that stuff today?
Yeah. And also, electric shock treatment is still fairly common in this country.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
What do they use that for? What does that treat according to the people who do it?
The psychiatrist thinks that electric shock treatment, they call it electroconvulsive therapy, right? It does, the electro and the convulsive is right, the therapy is wrong.
Right.
It essentially is firing a current of electricity through the brain and across the temporal lobes, usually. And a session of electroconvulsive therapy is usually over a period of about 2 weeks. You could get about 12 shocks in that time. And what it does is it's a bit, there's no real science or theory as to why it might work.
Okay.
Right? it's a bit like whacking your old TV set.
Sometimes it works.
Sometimes it seems to work, right?
Yeah.
And that's about the only sort of empirical science that they have connected to electroconvulsive therapy. And what they don't tell you is that if you start on a course of therapy, that you'll be back in a year's time for another course, and a year after that for another course of electroshock. And the danger, actually, what is occurring with electroshock treatment, of course, it's killing off brain cells. That's essentially what it's doing. And if anyone's had brain damage or a knock to the head, it can create a kind of a euphoric feeling, right? And it's that they attribute to the person feeling better, right? But in actual fact, it's carefully controlled brain damage. But they'll never acknowledge that.
Right. And so that's sort of how do you then define that these certain practices are abusive and counter those with what they do? How do you come up with that? And then how do you hold them accountable against? And
yeah, good question. Essentially, under mental health law, the psychiatrist has a license essentially to practice their treatments without any real accountability.
Really?
Yeah. And it means that they can treat a person against their will. We call it compulsory treatment. It's called compulsory treatment. The New Zealand Mental Health Act is called
an adult.
The Mental Health Compulsory Treatment, Compulsory Assessment and Treatment Act. It's been around since 1992. But that's not a new thing. You could go back a couple of hundred years, maybe even more, back to Europe and England and find the advent of compulsory mental health treatment done by doctors against a person's will. And they've just maintained that so-called right to treat a person against their will. And it means that they can use these brutal treatments, shock treatment, restraints, seclusion in the past, lobotomies and so on. And they go, well, it's treatment, right? It's what we do. And they justify it. They'll say, well, the person's psychotic and therefore we have to blast them with electricity, or we have to cut out a part of their brain, or we have to fire them up with a whole bunch of drugs, right? And look at the person now; they're subdued, they're quiet, and But in actual fact, these are artificial states that they're inducing.
Yeah,
right. No one's getting well from that. So the law has enabled them to practice those treatments without accountability to their workability, or to them people actually getting well. And this has been around for so long that the groups that have been lobbying for change in those laws have been working for a very long time. Really, the whole anti-psychiatry movement started in the 1960s, and it started with some key psychiatrists in the US and in the UK, and they were themselves psychiatrists. Thomas Sars was one of them. And they started publishing their work saying that these abusive treatments should stop, and you should stop treating people against their will because they're not getting better. And now that movement has turned into a whole survivor movement, people who've come out of psychiatric treatment and they've become advocates, or they've become, let's say, experts by reason of having gone through those treatments. And they then take up roles of trying to create change. There's some very key, important people in that field. And only in recent times, and I'd say going back in the last 10 years, this survivor movement of trying to create change in mental health law has been really quite effective. And now the United Nations, the Committee on the Rights of the Person with Disabilities, and also now the World Health Organization are both saying that nations who have laws that allow for compulsory mental health treatment should eradicate or remove those laws.
Mm.
And now countries like New Zealand and Australia and so forth are wrestling with that idea. How do we get rid of those mental health laws?
Mm.
And the psychiatrists themselves are worried because essentially it would remove the power that they have over the individual.
Right.
Right.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
if you or a friend or whatever was in mental health hands and you said, well, look, I don't want those drugs.
Yep.
Right. And you had the absolute right to say that.
Yeah.
That you wanted to go, to your cousin's place and spend, 2 weeks out on this farm to relax. Well, maybe that's a better choice for you.
Mm.
Right. And this is kind of where it can head now if you eliminate compulsory treatment from mental health law.
Yeah. So you think the alternative is physical spaces that feel safe, that people can be in.
That's just an example. I'd have to say overall, the alternatives are far more holistic than a medicalized brutal assault on the individual.
Yeah, holistic. I think that's sort of the word. I was going to say that, have you heard of Taranaki Retreat?
No.
I think they basically do something similar. It's a physical space that people who feel like they're seeing the end of their life, or, there's no hope. They kind of go there and they get engaged in physical, holistic environment that kind of just, I guess, calms them and gets them re-engaged and sort of build that healthy mind again, instead of, or give me some drugs, or, or I'm going to go to the mental facility at the hospital, and, interesting.
Well, that's a far better approach to mental health troubles. And we would even go so far to say that there's no such thing as a mental health illness. Now, this was first put forward really by Thomas Sars, the psychiatrist who helped found our group. And he wrote a book called The Myth of Mental Illness. And it's not an illness. It's an alteration of the mind.
Yeah.
But it's not a definable illness.
Yeah.
That you can then test for, you can take a blood sample for, or a biopsy of the brain. There's no test for mental illness. Right? It's only behaviour. They're only assessing behaviour.
Right.
And so behaviour is only those unwanted behaviours that our society cannot face or tolerate, or in certain environments, if you did certain things, you could be considered crazy.
Yeah.
And so, but they want to medicalize that behavior.
Right.
You see.
Yeah.
Because the doctor says, well, this is now medicalized behavior, and therefore we can apply what looks like a medical treatment, right, to that behavior. And so you have the use of pharmaceuticals, and even the electroshock. They kind of medicalize that. You don't just plug something into the wall socket and stick it on your head, right? They lay you down on a bed.
Yeah.
There's nurses in attendance. You now, if you're having electric shock treatment, you now have a relaxant and an anesthetic and so forth.
Yeah.
And it looks like a medical treatment now, right? A number of years ago, the anesthetic and the muscle relaxant was not present. And so the person would get the electrodes on the head and they would convulse on the bed. It would look horrible, and they would even break bones. The convulsions were that severe. I mean, they're sending quite a blast of electricity through the body. And you'd have nurses holding people down and so forth.
Yeah.
And we're looking at the 1960s kind of period where that was happening and before. And so it looked horrible. So then they come up with this anesthetic and this muscle relaxant. The same amount of electricity and even more is now going through the body because the body now has these chemical resistance to the electricity. So they're actually sending more electrical current through the body. And the only thing you see moving now is the toes.
Yeah.
Right? Now, that's more pleasant for the person watching.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
it's not necessarily more pleasant for the person experiencing it.
Mm.
They're in a coma. They're not feeling the pain of that shock,
Yeah.
but it's still being applied to their body, to their brain, and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating field of how we treat our fellow man in the West. And I'm talking about, this is a Western methodology, psychiatry.
That's why I like cognitive behavior therapy. You talk about it's not an illness, it's behaviors that we don't tolerate in certain parts of society and environments like workplaces, homes, parks, public places. So I like the term cognitive behavior therapy. It's actually rewiring the mind to behave in a different way. What are your thoughts on psychedelic treatment?
What, psychedelic music or art?
Like ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca.
Yeah, have you heard of ayahuasca? Ayahuasca and iboga are two medicines that they have high DMT activated in them, just like an LSD type thing. And then you pretty much engage with a shaman or a holistic healer who guides you into having this medicine. So it's a root of a plant that gets shredded, and you have it with a spoon or in the shapes of pill. It's macrodosing, so you macrodose, and then you basically get guided through intentions you're working with, your behaviors or ancestral healings or whatever your trauma is or whatever you're working on, and you are activated at a level where you can rewire your brain. You can do 10 years worth of work in pretty much a couple of nights.
I can't comment on that.
Sure.
The pharmaceutical companies are exploring the microdosing using LSD, psilocybin, and things like that.
Yeah, there's ibogaine.
And it's just the pharmaceutical companies just peddling the same old stuff. You know, they can't get off the idea that drugs are the form of therapy that people should be having. The far more interesting approach is a woman like Julia Ruckledge down in Christchurch at Canterbury University, who's exploring the use of dosing with vitamins and minerals and natural substances for mental upsets, for mental illness, for want of a better word. And her work is far more fascinating, that she's using just vitamins and minerals to improve mental health and dealing with serious forms of mental health using those ingredients. And that, to me, is, and I've met her, I mean, she's great.
Are you seeing results?
She's getting results.
Yeah.
She's writing them up. She's doing formal studies.
Right.
And I think she's got funding for various projects that she's working on.
Yeah.
But she and a group in Canada called True Hope that work with vitamins and minerals for mental illness are taking it right away from the pharmaceuticals, right away from the drugs.
Yeah.
To, what does the body need? You see, one of the things with mental illness or mental upsets, and it's something that psychiatry really needs to learn, is that a person presenting themselves with psychosis or any kind of behavioral thing is first check, is there a physical ailment underlying that condition, right? Is there something physically wrong with them? Are they malnourished? Do they have a thyroid problem? Really, an exhaustive test of the physical aspect of that person's body would actually empty out half of the psychiatric units by simply treating the physical problems those people are having.
Yeah.
Right? Because physical problems then, untreated, will cause mental difficulty. Right? But it has to be a searching physical examination. It can't be just, put a thermometer in your mouth and see if you've got a temperature. It's a proper testing of what does this person need. And then you can go from there. And one of the things that psychiatry has done, because it's been around for so many years, we actually have in society a lot of damaged people who they've spent most of their lives on psychiatric drugs. And you see them shuffling along in the streets. And they'll never get off their medication, according to the psychiatrist, because they're just kind of too far gone. That, to the psychiatric profession, is a problem, because those people aren't getting better. They're just maintained in some kind of dull, apathetic condition. But where things need to change is, how do you treat people going forward? You can't just keep on doing that.
Yeah. Why do you think they do that? Do you think it's because they're incentivized through the whole big pharma?
Big pharma certainly helps.
Right.
It certainly helps the process. I think, and this is where society has to really look at why it would use a subject like psychiatry to control its population, is that we don't tolerate people with different behaviors. And to put it simply, the village idiot is no longer allowed to be the village idiot. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That person now has to be examined and treated and in some way subdued. You see, in our society, we don't tolerate that. We don't tolerate that mad behaviour anymore.
Yeah.
And you can go back into other cultures, including the Māori culture, but certainly other indigenous cultures, and find that the person with an altered mind is even celebrated as being a seer or a shaman or some kind of insight into something that you and I might not have.
Yeah, they're gifted or...
Yeah, exactly.
They're genius or...
Yeah. So they're not this object of derision and this person needs treatment. They're actually cared for in a different way.
Yeah, and even worse is the labeling that goes with it. A lot of young kids that grow up with very proud of labeling themselves. Or I'm ADHD, or I'm dyslexic, or it's almost like I find that unhealthy. That I walk around with a label, or I'm this, or I'm that. There's a lot of incredible genius people in the world that Elon Musk is Asperger's. Jamie Oliver's got, I think, ADHD or something, that he struggled at school and he was labeled and he couldn't fit in the normal society because he was troublesome. But there's something there. But that's a really, really good point that other cultures celebrate it. Why is it that we don't? I mean, Western culture or Kiwi culture, it's you would think that it's the most advanced group of people in human civilization.
We'd like to think so.
Okay.
However, we're as barbaric as any other race, to be
Sure.
honest. And I call it barbaric, not necessarily lightly or ironically. If you look at how our society can treat children, you find a certain barbarism that you won't find in other cultures.
Interesting.
You see, and I think that's probably a good place to introduce the story of Lake Alice Psychiatric Hospital.
Yes, please.
And what we discovered there.
Yeah.
And so to tell that story, go back to 1976, and our group had just started. And one of the first things they did was they asked to go around various psychiatric institutions, and some of them let them in. I don't think they knew who they were letting in, to be honest. And one of those hospitals was Lake Alice. And it was over the summer break period in early 76. And they were allowed into the children's unit. And there they met children from around the ages of 8 to 15, who were telling them, we are being electric shocked as punishment. Right? And they were telling them that those shocks weren't necessarily applied only to the head while they're wide awake, but also to the parts of their body, the limbs, the shoulders, the arms, and so forth. So this is just bizarre. It was bizarre to hear it. And they're also telling the group that they were being given these drugs also as punishment, because the drugs that they were being given or the main drug they were being given is called paraldehyde. And paraldehyde is this old drug that when it's injected into you, into the thigh or the buttocks, it causes excruciating pain where you can no longer walk, right? You can't hardly move after the application of this drug. And it would leave this kind of stench in the body for hours or even days. These kids would be incapacitated with these drugs. So the group wrote it up and published it, and it made the news. And that then inspired some of the children inside that unit to start trying to contact people outside, like their parents or whomever. And there was one kid whose name is Haki Halo. He's from Niue Island. I think he was age 13. He was trying to tell his parents that he's being electric shocked and it was painful. But whenever he tried to tell them, his letters were being stopped. So what he did was he, quite cleverly, he drew a cartoon or a stick picture with a smiley face, but in his own language. It had this, I am being shocked, it is painful. They're giving me electric shocks, it's painful. And of course the people reading his letters, all they saw was a stick figure with a smiley face. They didn't try and interpret the Niuean language. And he said he sent about 6 of these pictures to his mum. And eventually it got through, and she contacted a guy who was part of another group called the Auckland Committee on Racism and Discrimination. His name was Oliver Sutherland. And he was working a lot with Pacific Island people. And he sort of took that case and it actually made it to a magisterial inquiry in 1977. So here we have a judge now going to sit and hear the story of this Niuean boy. And around the same time, the ombudsman had a case of 2 other, I think it was 2 other people, maybe 1 other, who was also treated in this Lake Ellis unit. So here we have 2 investigations occurring. The magisterial inquiry was seriously interesting. One, it was not public, so it wasn't open to the public. Our group got to attend. There's no written record of this inquiry. The only record of what went on inside that room was the notes that members from CCHR were taking. And the magistrate, incredibly, he was being advised by certain psychiatrists here in this country. The perpetrator of the shocks was Dr. Selwyn Leeks. I can't forget that, Dr. Selwyn Leeks. He was the main guy. He was the guy who ran the unit. But there were other psychiatrists at the inquiry, and they were obviously advising the magistrate or being consulted. And so in the findings of the magistrate, he wrote that electric shock treatment of a child without anesthetic is not so much of a problem because their bones are supple and are less likely to break during the convulsion. Right? Just think of that.
Wow.
That's astonishing. This is at a time when anesthetics were in standard use during ECT.
Yeah.
And the other part of that inquiry said that the real problem wasn't the Selwyn Leeks and his barbaric treatment of children. The real problem was CCHR and this group called Accord who were exposing it. Because we could put people off having psychiatric treatment.
Right.
Right.
Exposing was the real problem there.
That was the real problem. The ombudsman was much better. His investigation was much better because he dug into the issue of consent and the lack of consent from the children's parents, etc. And the fact that social welfare had care of a lot of these children, and they were putting these children into Lake Ellis, almost like a dumping ground,
right,
and letting whatever happen. But of course, when the state becomes the parent, of course they have the role and responsibility of a parent.
Yeah.
But no, to them, Lake Alice was a fine place to send these children.
Wow.
So here you have, from between 1972 to 1977, probably close to 400 or so children going through this unit, being brutalized and shocked and drugged under this mad doctor, this mad psychiatrist. And the nursing staff, there's a contingent of the nursing staff were equally sinister, equally sadistic, applying the drugs, beating the children up, restraining them, putting them into seclusion, sexual assaults, you name it, it was happening there, rape.
Wow.
But to sort of get a real sense of the horror of what happened at Lake Alice would be to go to the 2021 Royal Commission of Inquiry Investigation, the hearing into Lake Alice, which is online. And there you see survivors giving their testimony of what happened to them. And it was, I got to say, frightening. It's frightening to watch, frightening to listen to. The descriptions that they gave, because these are children. If you have an 8-year-old kid or a 10-year-old kid or whatever, imagine them being dragged literally by 2 or 3 nurses into a room, held down and shocked, up and down their body, and some, believe it or not, even on the genitals, and sort of think that that's okay. How could that possibly be? And so the children they just have this thing called a day room where they would wait, where they were waiting, and their name would be called out, and they would be dragged upstairs. These kids were in this day room, shitting themselves, urinating, out of intense fear that they would be next, right? And that's how this society in the 1970s treated children.
Wow.
Right? And we would have called that a civilized country. Too afraid to look too hard at what this mad psychiatrist was doing. And possibly because you didn't have to go too much further than Lake Alice to find children in Porirua Hospital down in Lower Hutt also being treated with electric shocks, brutalized. You could go down to Sunnyside in Christchurch, or Cherry Farm in Dunedin, or Tokanui out in Hamilton, and find similar treatments being used. And so obviously they didn't want any wider inquiry into electric shock use or anything like that. So these early inquiries were all about shutting it down. There was a couple of guys went to the police about what happened to them in Lake Alice. And only recently the police report on that 77 investigation has emerged. That was also shut down with the aid of certain psychiatrists who endorsed Dr. Selwyn Leeks as being a good, prominent member of the psychiatric community and excusing his bizarre treatment. The medical council even had a look at this, and the medical council looked at a specific case of one boy who approached them, and he claimed that he and about 5 others were enticed by Dr. Leeks to electric shock another boy, right? So he had them in the room operating the electric shock machine on another child. This other child had been sexually assaulting them, and this was his way of saying, well, you can get some kind of therapeutic payback.
Wow.
That is just unbelievable, right?
Wow.
But if you saw this on a movie, you'd think, no, fuck off, that would never happen.
Yeah.
And here it is before the medical council, and Dr. Leeks doesn't even deny it. He doesn't even deny that he's done this. And they let him off. And they issued him with a certificate of good practice.
Really?
He skipped the country in 1978, ended up in Melbourne practicing as a child psychiatrist.
Wow.
Right? So they let him off.
And so you decided to take them to the UN?
That was a long process because that was the late 70s. All these things, it was intense. It was happening then. And one of the guys that was working, or two of the guys that were working on it personally then, are still around today. And they both spoke at the Royal Commission about what happened. And yeah, they then looked at Porirua Hospital after Lake Alice and started writing about that. And the next Lake Alice case that came on our lines was about 1990. I think one of the kids had come out and approached us and said, what can we do? So we laid a complaint then, and the medical council again ignored it. By the mid-1990s, there's a woman who filed a legal suit against Dr. Selwyn Leeks and the Ministry of Health, her and one other survivor. And her case was being opposed by the government, opposed by the psychiatrist. And yet, when they looked at the files of Lake Alice, they knew that something was terribly wrong. There was even a couple of psychiatrists that reassessed what was happening in Lake Alice, who also said that this was incredibly wrong. And yet the government chose to fight that case and try and strike it out even. And so her case, as legal cases go, it seemed to sort of just churn on and on. And by, I think, about 98 or 97, there was a secret meeting where Dr. Leeks was flown to Auckland to meet with this survivor. And they're trying to sort of pressure her to, in some weird way. I mean, that in itself is a little bit astonishing, because when you've got this abuser being supported by lawyers and ministry people, confronting you, I mean, maybe you have your lawyers with you, but that's quite an abusive process. The state did not get behind the woman and say, look, something should happen to this. Something did happen to you, we should be putting it right. None of that. They chose to fight it. So by the late 90s, a good number of survivors came out, 50 or more, and a lawyer took it up as a class action suit, which then turned into, I think he got 95 cases altogether. That was part of his class action suit. This is a lawyer by the name of Grant Cameron. And he was working to get some kind of out-of-court settlement, it seemed. The government certainly didn't want it to go to court. That would be too much for them, because it would set a precedent. So they wanted to keep it out of court. They ended up paying $6.5 million to 95 claimants. Once the lawyer took his fees off, it was averaged about $60,000 per claimant, which wasn't, it was high for its time, but if you were tortured as a child and the effects of that torture were lifelong, lasting damage, $60,000 is not a lot. It might buy you a fairly decent car. And then another 100 claimants came after that, and they were paid out similar amounts. I'm going to cut a long story short here, because they were essentially, these payments were settling a legal suit. They weren't compensation. They were called ex gratia payments, which means it's a gift, right? And it said it's full and final settlement of this case, right? And we thought, no. What about the perpetrators of these acts of torture, right? So we gave 6 cases documented to the police as a formal police complaint. Grant Cameron then filed another 40 cases following ours. So now the police had 46 cases of alleged ill treatment, torture, cruelty to children, and they sat on that case for 7 or 8 years. They didn't even interview one of the claimants or one of the complainants, right? And that was astonishing to us, that the police would not conduct a proper investigation. So by 2010, the police said, no, nothing to see here, folks, no crime's been committed, which we knew was utter nonsense. And that's when we took it to the UN. Because when you start taking cases to the United Nations, you exhaust all your local remedies. And so the guy that was running CCHR at the time, Steve Green, he wrote up some submissions to the United Nations Convention Committee Against Torture about the Lake Ellis cases. And in 2012, the Committee Against Torture said to the New Zealand government, you need to open a new investigation into Lake Ellis. It's got to be fair and impartial, and to compensate the victims if you find that torture had been committed. Well, New Zealand at the UN was saying, no, we've done everything we need to have done. We don't need to do anything else. So then, come 2015, Steve and one of the survivors, Paul Zenfeld, travelled to Geneva to personally represent the case at Geneva. And again, the Committee Against Torture said, New Zealand, you've got to investigate and open this investigation again to the perpetrators and hold them to account.
Yeah.
Right? The committee members of the Against Torture at the UN said to Paul at the time, it's not often we get to meet victims of torture.
Mm.
So they fully acknowledged what was happening there. And his case was it showed that, throwing apples, for example, he was given injections.
Wow.
Right? Misbehaving. Paul got about 80 electric shocks that were documented on his file.
Mm.
And they didn't document the shocks on the arms, the legs, or the genitals. But he did get it on the genitals. For bedwetting, by the way.
What?
So then, when was it? 2015. We applied to the Official Information Act about the police investigation and asked them to turn over what they actually had in Paul's case.
Mm.
And it said there was a possibility a crime has been committed. And they chose to ignore it.
Mm.
So we wrote that up as a formal complaint to the Convention Against Torture people in Geneva. And the New Zealand respondent, the government, responded to that complaint saying that they'd done everything that they needed to have done to investigate Lake Ellis and that their complaint should be considered invalid, etc., etc. Well, fortunately, the Committee Against Torture people, these are razor-sharp people. Mm. They deal with torture cases. They are no dummies.
Yeah, at a global level.
Eh?
At a global level, they're looking at all sorts of different cases.
Yeah.
Just because your government, you're saying that should be invalid, they're not just going to take your word for it. They don't exist to do that.
No.
That's why they exist.
That's right. So so the New Zealand responded. And of course, we got that response. It was a 30-odd page cover letter with 400 pages of attachments, which was a little overwhelming. But it was pretty clear, because we're not lawyers, but you get to learn a bit about these processes as you go.
Yeah.
It was pretty clear that they were saying that all of their investigations were sufficient. But the one obvious thing was that they were only willing to look at isolated cases, never at a group, right? The Nuayan boy in 77, the one with the ombudsman, the early police investigation, they're all single cases, right? When the 195 were given this payout, a retired High Court judge in 2002 wrote an unsolicited report about his assessment of what he had met when he talked to these survivors.
Mm.
It's called the Galen Report, because his name's Rodney Galen. And he described what he had heard from these survivors. And it was at that time, when we filed the police complaint, that they should have looked at a greater number of stories and saw the consistency across all of their accounts, which in itself is evidential, right? Because you're not going to put on the medical file, shocked as genitals, But here you have a number of children saying that they were shocked on the genitals, that they were punished with electric shocks. And so when New Zealand was arguing at the UN that they'd done a proper investigation, was utter hogwash, to put it mildly. And so we simply countered that and said, no, they've only been willing to look at individual cases, never at a group, collective. They couldn't even interview one survivor in the police investigation. And so we won that case at the UN, and the decision came out in late 2019, early 2020. And that changed things overnight.
Wow.
When the UN case came through. It made nationwide news. The police said they're going to open a new investigation. And the Royal Commission of Inquiry said that they're going to do a case study of Lake Alice in a public hearing. And then it was all on. And Paul and I, Paul Zanfeld, the survivor, we went and met the police who were investigating this. Really good officers they put in charge of the case. I have to say that they dealt with it with integrity. It took them too long. They had various stops and barriers, I think, through trying to get files out of other government departments. I think these other departments weren't particularly cooperating with the police. But I think the police were trying to do a good job. The Royal Commission of Inquiry hearing in 2021, fantastic. It's what needed to happen back in 1978, back in 2000.
Yeah.
Now it was happening, and it was 40 plus years too late.
Wow.
But still the survivors gave their account, and it was utterly horrific. It would bring tears to your eyes, to be honest, to hear some of those accounts.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, and where does that lead you now in terms of, what's changing in this whole psychiatric practices?
Well, you see, that's really interesting. Because you think, well, this is a catalyst for change.
Yeah, 40 odd years later.
Yeah, and you would hope it is a catalyst for change. And there are a number of things that are happening, because the Crown has to respond to what the Royal Commission is producing.
Right.
And one of the things that the Royal Commission has put forward is that to provide proper redress for these abused survivors. Now, redress, especially redress for victims of torture, under the Convention Against Torture, is a human right. Right? If you are tortured, you have a human right to be rehabilitated. Right? Good old New Zealand, who enacted the Crimes of Torture Act in 1989, put a reservation on the Article 14 on the right to redress, saying that it's not an automatic right, that the Attorney General is the one to assess whether you get redress or not. Okay. The Attorney General is a political appointment.
Yep.
And it gives that one individual too much power, because there's every idea of evidence that would show that from the Crown Law Office that they were fighting the survivors of Lake Alice back in the 90s and in the 2000s, trying to minimize those payouts, right? And now it's up to the Attorney General to say, well, yeah, we're going to give you redress. No, it's probably not likely that that's going to happen. So that reservation on Article 14 needs to go.
Right.
So in this country, it's a human right that if you get tortured, you can expect redress and rehabilitation.
Yeah.
And So we've been lobbying for that at a UN level. It's about to come up again in April and in June again this year. Meanwhile, the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists, who are the professional body of which Dr. Leeks was a senior member, they were urged to produce a proper apology for what happened to the Lake Alice survivors.
Yeah.
Well, they mustered themselves to produce this apology, which came out only a few weeks ago. I don't know if you heard about that.
No.
Down in Palmerston North.
Right.
The president of the college flew over from Australia. Survivors were brought into the room, and this apology was read out to them.
Right.
From this Royal College of Psychiatrists. Now, you got to understand that these survivors, they're not stupid people. That's a big mistake to think they are.
Yeah.
They might be messed up, and certainly, they are in various impoverished states of health, and none of them are doing particularly well. The ones that tend to do well are the ones that have managed to be working. But they're not stupid. And so when they listened to this woman's apology, it was like, really? You're kidding. In fact, one woman in the middle of the apology says, "Oh, this is bullshit."
Yeah.
And she got up and walked out. It was so badly organized that you could hear her voice in the next door room louder than you could hear the woman giving the apology. And then it was kind of turned over to the group to respond to this. And not one of the survivors accepted the apology. Not one of them. In fact, they were very, very angry and very, very upset that here's this group of people that could... The apology was kind of a bit about them, It was like, we're doing better now, we've improved. Come on.
Yeah.
If you're going to apologize
You
to
can't
someone...
expect anything more from them, to be honest. They're so typical.
You're right. There's a certain arrogance to that approach, isn't there?
Yeah. These type of organization always do. It's all about them. And you kind of see that, I see that in councils here, There's a lot of organizations that have that. But sorry, carry on.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is. It's not about, these are survivors. They're not there to hear about your work and where you're trying to improve and what you're doing and how, who's your latest board members and the new doctors you're hiring and your new courses you're doing and your new practices you're following that are maybe more holistic. These are survivors. They're there to relive their experience where they were harmed by your practices. And so the scope of this apology or conversation is very limited and restricted to that one-on-one conversation with the group of people. And the best way you can do that is you interact with them beforehand and understand them and understand their experiences. And your apology is then, better understood and better written and then better engaged in a public environment that you're engaging to do that. It's just basic. When you remove yourself from the complexities of the bureaucracy that goes on, it's very simple to do. But the moment you are stuck in that world, you're actually driven by what's accepted for you to say and who's approving that and who's going to then continue to accept you in your world. It's very similar to the hearing that happened in the States where the presidents of universities were asked to come and speak at the Congress, I believe, if there was hatred and anti-Semitic behavior going on at universities as a result of the October 7th attack by the Hamas on the Israelis and the retaliation. And each president said, well, that depends on the context. And that just got the whole world very, very upset that there was anti-Semitism going on at these universities. It was very bad. And these professors of universities like Harvard University are saying, well, we don't believe it's anti-Semitic. That anti-Semitism is contextual. So it's happening in the world and in all sorts of different pockets of that's ideology driven or agenda driven or special interest groups that, whether it's big pharma or, and it's you see that trend in the whole mismanagement of COVID. There was, all these hospitals and people who made the vaccine very heavily incentivized to do that. So you get really muddled up with your thoughts and behaviors and practices, and you ignore the individuals that have been harmed in that process.
That's right. And it's interesting that you said all of that, because you were spot on. At one point, Elizabeth Moore, who was the president of the college, tried to introduce the local in charge of the Royal College of Psychiatry to talk about psychiatric practices today. And as he stood up, one of the survivors said, "Oh, we don't want to hear about this. Does anyone want to hear about this?"
Get off the stage.
And he did. He did.
Oh, great.
But that was exactly that approach.
Yeah.
And so what was important about that apology, and I said it in the media, was not what they said to the survivors, it's what they heard as a response from the survivors. And I think they were truly shocked what they heard. I don't think that they really anticipated the intensity of the emotion, and the pain and the hurt that they had unleashed at that meeting. It was palpable, really. It really was. And now the Royal College has said that they want to assist in some way the survivors. And we'll see where that goes. I mean, they seem to be nice enough people. I mean, I've met psychiatrists before, and I've met a lot worse than what I met down in Palmerston North.
Yeah.
Because they do tend to have a hallmark of arrogance in terms of their rightness and their righteousness about what they do. If indeed this this profession can adapt and adopt holistic approaches without compulsory treatment, that would be seriously interesting, right? But it's a bit like asking the Catholic Church to be non-celibate, It's
yeah.
It would be a life-changing historic event.
Yeah.
You see.
Yeah.
So let's see where that goes. It's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, there's a place for medicine. Medicine's done a lot of great things, but there's a fine line to that as well.
Yeah.
It's the holistic approaches are definitely the way to go.
Oh, for sure. And I think the world's waking up to that.
Yep.
There's so many things that point to that.
Yeah.
The reason that the mental health specialty is interesting, right, is that most people had not experienced this idea of compulsory, mandatory treatment until the COVID vaccine came along.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And when they said, well, this is mandatory, if you want to go to work, you have to have this vaccine.
Yeah.
If you want to go and see that show, you better have a vaccine because we're not going to let you in otherwise.
Yeah.
So many people had that vaccine, not for medical purposes, but for social purposes.
Yeah.
That it was kind of bizarre. But you see, that practice has been around in psychiatry for 100 years or more in this country.
Yeah.
Right? And no one objected to it, except for those that had it.
Yeah.
And so here it was being played out on a worldwide stage. And the interesting thing was that there was a strong reaction against it. There was a strong movement against it. And I think that sparked off a lot of inquiry. You know, a lot of, really? You know, is the government really the single source of truth, as we mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
And does that not sound like something out of a George Orwell novel?
Yeah.
You know?
It is.
And so on. But you see, in mental health, that Orwellian approach has always been there, except people aren't aware of it until they get stuck in it, or someone close to them is stuck in it, a family member or a friend. To get a person out of a psychiatric unit in this country and many other countries is a heroic act. I mean, it really is that hard. They have the right to treat a person while they're assessing them. In some cases where I've been asked to help people out of a psychiatric unit, which I don't like doing because it's our core practice is to lay complaints about abusive treatment. We're not Batman where we swing on a rope and rescue people from the hands of the nasty, mean psychiatrists.
Yeah.
But where I have been involved in those circumstances, I actually appeal to the psychiatrist to say, well, why not? They don't want the drug, so why not let them have that choice? I said to one who I think was a bit enlightened, actually two, and I said, look, just the person needs sleep, good food. Give them that for a week or so, they'll be fine. And they said, yeah, okay, we'll try it.
Yeah.
And it was fine. They let them out. It's like, oh, okay, you know, this was...
that worked.
That worked. But we're not going to tell too many people. We're not going to do a case study of this, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, just one off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that would upset their model of practice, wouldn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
So here we are as a group, and we've been fighting for the human rights of the people inside the mental health system. And sure, I guess, you know, we were ahead of the game going back 50 or so years, saying that people should have the right to choose and a right to refuse treatment. And now the world's catching up with those ideas. But I think anyone who's like forward thinking, it does take 50 years for these ideas to seep through in our rather entrenched bureaucratic sort of model of society. These wheels turn very slowly. Anyone working in the field of human rights knows that it's a slow process, and you get certain gains. Sometimes those gains wind back in other ways too. They can be removed overnight, but it's an incremental advance in terms of trying to accomplish these things.
Yeah, it is. But it's incredible the work that you're doing. It's you know, it's going against governments and taking them to the United Nations. It's a big feat. It's you know, fighting for something that happened, you know, for 40 years. That something happened 50 years ago. It's incredible work, and you know, and until I spoke to you today, I didn't know that this was going on.
Right.
You know, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't. And yes, it is a human right. I've always engaged in holistic treatments. I've always campaigned for that within my own groups and circles. That's, I think, is the way to go. But you're right. Forward thinking is such a small percentage of people that sort of understand that. And most of the people are in that I guess, controlled or survival-based consciousness that sits within a system that sort of, you know, drives their lives. I think now is the time for change, for big shifts in systems, to really adjust and be brave. And some of the things that I'm hearing about this new coalition government certainly they kind of have that attitude that they need to drive some bigger changes. Not quite sure what that looks like from a health perspective and a therapy perspective and rights given to people. But it's quite concerning that people's rights are taken away for them to be making that decision, and how they fall into the system to get to a point that they are then forced and electrocuted, especially in when you are the parents of a child.
Yes, you'll find that today electroconvulsive therapy, we call it electroshock, because that electroconvulsive therapy is like a euphemism. It's kind of minimizing what's really going on. They're shocking the brain.
Yeah.
Roughly 250 to 300 people a year would get that here in New Zealand now.
Wow.
Back in the 70s, that would have been over 7,000, right? When we campaigned about Lake Ellis, that figure dropped by about half.
Wow.
Right? Which actually tells you that there's a certain political element to psychiatry,
Yeah.
right?
Which is tied to public opinion.
Exactly.
So when you campaign, it drops and you can see the shifts.
Yeah. Let's say 300 people a year get it here in New Zealand. That's not a lot of people, unless it's happening to you. And they would get about 12 shocks each session. So we're saying, well, just stop it. Just don't give them electric shocks. You don't need to. Why not just switch the machine off, work some other way to help that person. Don't start shocking the brain.
Yeah.
It's something it feels like it's something out of the 19th century, not the 20th or 21st century.
Yeah.
And it should go the way of bloodletting. Bloodletting was that medical procedure where no matter what was wrong with you, they're going to cut a vein and let some blood pressure out, because sometimes it seems to work. It also killed a few people too, by the way. So we say it should go the way of bloodletting. It's just an old treatment that really has no validity. For some reason, psychiatrists tend to like to hang on to shock treatment. I have no idea why.
So how do you stop it? Do you campaign for a bill to make it illegal? Or
Yeah, well, that would be the only way to do it.
are you doing that?
Yeah, well, we would certainly submit that in any change to the mental health legislation.
Yeah.
Or to tie it up with so much red tape that no one wants to do it anymore, because it means too much writing and reporting. And in fact, New Zealand is reviewing the Mental Health Act now, and they're saying it should be a human rights-based act in line with the United Nations. We're saying, yeah, that's right. It should be like that. Well, someone in the health department released the internal notes on this review to the Mental Health Act. And, it's about over 100, maybe 190 pages of this. 118 pages of this stuff, right? And it's just page after page of text. No one really picks that apart too much, but we do. And there in the final pages of that report about the review of the Mental Health Act, they actually notice that it might save them money. They've actually done a dollar calculation on how much money it would save if they stopped abusing patients, because patients tend to file complaints and then they have to pay out some kind of reparation. And they cited one particular complaint of a disabled person being held against his will, obviously, but being held secure inside a van for 45 minutes. Obviously, that person complained, and he was awarded $5,000 for this abuse. They use that as one example of abuse. $5,000 for 45 minutes of being stuck inside a van. And they say, well, if we stop restraining people and putting people into seclusion, well, we could be saving millions of dollars and also saving time of having to write the reports of why we put them into seclusion in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's kind of wrong-headed, isn't it?
Yeah.
The reason you stop that stuff is
Yeah.
because it's abuse,
Yeah.
not because it's saving you money.
Yeah. It's like not a human rights mindset.
Yeah.
It's like, we've kind of somehow lost the humanity in us.
Yeah.
We are caught in something, whatever that is. It's just we're sedated by processes and legislations and politics and public opinion, and we're just sedated by it.
That's right.
We're just constant. There is no room to poke your head above that and have a look at it and go, well, and I think that problem is rooted at all different layers of hierarchy: government, parliament, the committees, unions, colleges, universities, parenting. It just goes on and on.
Oh, it does. And again, why the mental health angle is so interesting, because it's a tight focus, and I'm aware of all those other issues. But with that tight focus, you sort of see it's a microcosm of the macrocosm, right? If we can treat children in such a brutal way and defend it, what else are we capable of as a society, right? And and you said earlier, by the way, taking this case to the UN was, impressive. For us, it wasn't impressive, right? We kind of knew we needed to do it. We'd never done it before. We just studied how to write up a complaint to the UN. I think we could tick the boxes that we'd exhausted all the legal remedies inside the country. That's the first criteria. And then just to put the case forward with evidence of what was the problem. So we covered that, and then providing the legal argument to defeat the government's argument. None of us are screaming geniuses. I think the government was stupid, to be honest, in their response. And they paid the price for it because they lost, right? But it's inspired other people. I've been approached by numerous other people saying, how do we complain to the UN? How do we do this?
Yeah.
And I'm not about to run a seminar on it.
Start a new business on the side.
There's a business model, complaints to the UN.
Yeah.
But I have had people, there was one guy from, I think he was from the Ministry of Justice or somewhere, responding to something that the UN was asking, that making it more possible for young people to approach the UN with a complaint, right?
Right.
So this guy rang me up. I was recommended by the Ombudsman, I believe. And he said, so what do you do? We're having this phone conversation. I said, well, first of all, you don't abuse people. And therefore, that eliminates the need for young people to approach the UN regarding mistreatment.
Yeah.
Right. I said, so first of all, you should approach it that way.
Yeah.
Rather than how do you make the channel to the UN easier.
Yeah.
And I said the other part of that is to understand the UN process, which is they have to exhaust all of the local remedies. So when they file a complaint, that complaint is properly acted upon and not swept under the carpet, not excused, but an actual proper investigation takes place. And then that alleviates the need to go to the UN. I said those things should go in first.
Yeah.
And then if those aren't in, well, obviously the UN is the final place of recourse. But this is fundamental. This is fundamental stuff.
Yeah.
So we have now, and it's been around for a long time, and I think it's the downfall of Western civilization, to be honest, is how we treat children. And because children obviously are our next generation, the Royal Commission of Inquiry, I think it's, although you could say it's had its ups and downs, I think what's really important about their work is the exposure of the utter abuse of children in this country in care as applied by the state and the state-run institutions. And I've included faith-based run institutions as well, and they were often at the hands of the state anyway, because the state would be funding those churches to look after children as well. But these were places of sheer and utter abuse of kids. Yeah. And Lake Alice was the, perhaps the seventh layer of hell, but these other places were hell as well. They were degrading, ill treatment, punishment, rape. Rape of boys was very, very common. And it's like, wow. And I grew up in that period of 1970s. And I know that there was this idea that if you really misbehaved, you could end up in Borstal. Borstal was this word. But Borstal seemed to have this, like, oh, you never want to go to one of those places. Although none of us had seen inside one of those places. But now we get to hear about what was going on. And now we're having to reconcile that. These places were the genus of our gangs. Children, Māori and Pacific Island predominantly, because they got the brunt of the abuse, formed gangs. When you think about it, that's a logical outcrop from that abuse, right? You live in a state that punishes you and your friends that you've met in these places. What do you do when you get out? Well, you form a subculture. And that subculture becomes protective of you and people like you, right? Because they don't trust the state. They don't trust any authority. So they form their own gang, right? And they arm themselves and they do things and they finance themselves. But here you have people almost self-defensively creating a subculture to protect themselves, right? And now the gangs themselves are the problem. Well, in actual fact, it's not true, right? The problem is the culture that created the gangs, not the gangs themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And there was a meeting at the Royal Commission where they invited gang members to come and talk. It was pretty interesting and pretty moving because they each acknowledged that the pathway into those gangs was through state care. And if you'd been to Lake Alice, you almost automatically made a captain of the gang because they knew that was the worst.
Wow.
Right. And so underlying that so-called exterior of gang member, underlying that is an individual who had been so brutally punished, they probably lost all self-esteem in the process. A lot of them went into crime.
Yeah.
A lot of them ended up in jail. A lot of them stayed in and out of jail, et cetera, et cetera. I know a few guys like that.
Yeah. I think you're so on point, the culture and how that, creates these pathways that become all these issues that eventually governments try to fight and people like yourself go to the UN for when you can actually, focus on not creating those abuse in the first place. I recently read a book called Bad Therapy by Abigail Shrier. She was on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast and talking about bad therapy, why is it bad for kids? And there's a huge culture of parents pushing their kids to go to therapy. And she talks about how therapy is generally a bad idea for kids because kids don't have the mind to make their own decisions or understand what's going on. It's forced against probably their rights. And some of the things she talks about, the issues that we have in our culture today in Western society is permissive parenting. Permissive parenting is most, parenting of liberal households. And her evidence suggests that boys have a higher rate of depression and anxiety than girls in conservative families, families where there is structure and rules. girls normally have a higher level of anxiety and depression during their teenage years, but boys who are raised with liberal values have a higher state of anxiety and depression and eventually lead to much more mental issues later in life. So there is a lot going on in Western culture, from ideologies to permissive parenting, that is causing a lot of issues in the culture that's leading to a lot of mental health issues.
Nothing like creating the problem and then coming up with the solution.
Yeah, it's a rat race, isn't it? Whereas your approach is very powerful. It's well, just focus on not creating the issue in the first place. Then you don't need all these extra resources to constantly try to investigate and write reports and respond to the UN with 300-page cover letters and 30-page cover letters and 400-page response documents. And
that's right. Wonder how long they muddled over that one for.
A couple of months.
Couple of months, probably.
Lots of coffee in the morning. And
they probably had a team of people working on it, heavens above. And me and my associate,
that's just dumb.
We looked at it and we thought, how do we respond to this? Well, of course, it's quite a lot to it. We didn't read all 400 pages, by the way. But
and you still won.
And we still won. And there were some parts I didn't even get. I thought, what the hell are they talking about? Anyway.
Yeah.
But I think the idea that I was going to say that they were working so hard at defending it is, like you said earlier, they're somewhat a few steps away from their own humanity. They should have been sympathetic to the fact that here's a survivor saying, no, you didn't do it right. And still they're trying to defend it. They can't go, okay, guys, we didn't get it right. You're right. You're right. We'll do it right. They can't say that.
What?
And that forever seems to be the puzzling question. Why can't they do that?
Yeah, it's. I think it's a sad thing for humanity that we've lost our ability to stand up and say, well, I've got it wrong. I accept my mistakes, and we go from there. It's interesting. Like, you look at why humans go to war. Why do we kill each other? Is it human nature, or is it a consequence of how society is structured? Many would argue it's human nature. And it's we look at, we've studied the chimps and the chimp empires. They're 99.8% similar to us. And the type of wars they start and the harm they cause to different tribes of chimps is just incredible, right? So there's a lot to be said about the reasons why we do what we do, and then we've kind of become, the response is more civilized in terms of denial. George Orwell says ignorance is strength, right? It's all there. Instead of, we've got it wrong. It's easier to, do what Jacinda Ardern did, or I'm out, I don't have any more gas in my tank. Well, no, you're leaving because it's going to be a shit show or a shitstorm if you stay, because it's all going to come out and people are going to be very upset with the management of COVID. For instance, Dr. Phil recently talked about how it is safer for kids to have got COVID than isolating kids away from the environments where they socialize and interact and study, right? And the impacts of that to their mental health is going to be a lifelong impact, right? So all those kind of stuff is we somehow have got to a stage in human civilization in Western society where we are just incapable of looking at ourselves and reflecting and having the courage to stand up to the mistakes that we've made and go back to your point, the first point. Don't do it in the first place, instead of spending all this time in narcissistic, ego-driven behaviors of hiding what had happened and defending yourself through your position. It's almost like a self-destruction mechanism.
It is. I agree. I totally agree. And that's going back to this thing with children again, because I think that's a real focus, certainly in today's talk. The lay callous being the most egregious treatment. You won't find a torture treatment of children like that anywhere else in the world, I don't think.
Wow.
We haven't. But and this is coming back to something you said earlier too, this idea of labels. Now, you see, psychiatry has become more sophisticated, even in the last 20 to 40 years. They emptied out the big asylums, right? And they now said, well, treatment in mental health is now community-based. Now, what that looks like, because we hear about it, it's compulsory treatment in the community. Okay, so no longer are you in a hospital with other patients and you've been given your pills. That does happen inside psychiatric units, but compulsory treatment in the community is taking your medication each day, and even having the community team come to your house to make sure that you take that medication every day. Right? That's psychiatry on an industrial scale, okay, to manage that. I think there's about maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people in this country under compulsory treatment at any one time. That's a lot of visits to people's houses. If you don't take your medication, they'll probably take you to the unit to spend 2 weeks and probably being taken by the police to get there.
Wow.
Right. And I know of some recent cases where there was one particular guy, and a friend of mine was kind of advocating for him. They wanted to take him out of his house immediately. They had the police there, they had the mental health team. And he's going, I don't want to go. He goes, what are you going to do with my dog? He's going to look after my dog. He just want me to come out of this room and out of where I'm staying, and who's going to feed him? You're going to take responsibility for that? And they don't have an answer for that because they want that body inside the unit taking the drugs. That's their mission.
Yeah.
If you're not taking the drugs, well, you're now non-compliant.
Yeah.
So our mental health treatment is all about compliance. Okay, you got to comply to the regime of treatment.
Yeah, and not holistic and the impact it causes to the kids or the dogs or
whatever.
whatever is outside of that body.
Yeah,
that is non-compliant.
That's right. So when you are compliant, from the psychiatrist's point of view, you're getting well. Right? You've now confessed that, in a way, you've confessed that, yes, I am mentally ill and these drugs are necessary for my wellness. That's what they want you to say or at least indicate. Right? It makes them right. Right? And so non-compliance to them is a sin. And even our society thinks along these lines too. Unfortunately, they go, well, if he offers meds, he's offers rocker. Right? And he's dangerous, or she is dangerous, which is actually not true. What happens is if a person chooses to stop their medication, which is a kind of a dangerous thing to do, and I don't advocate it. The withdrawal is severe. They're so drugged up on these powerful drugs that any stopping of it does cause a psychological shift. And any real management of getting people off these drugs has to be careful, it has to be gradual, and it has to be controlled. But psychiatrists know how to put you on them. They don't know how to get them off, how to get you off them. And it's usually people working outside the psychiatric field that assist people to help, off their drugs. So coming back to the here in this country, other countries, so all the treatment these days is community-based, predominantly, unless you're non-compliant, you end up in the unit.
Mm.
With the more sophisticated in the approach to children, instead of putting them to a place like Lake Alice for their bad behaviour, or another psychiatric hospital, they now want to treat you at school, right? So they come up with labels like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or some kind of conduct disorder. And these are applied to little children. Okay. And essentially what they're trying to assess is the behavior of a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old along psychological lines of some kind of normalcy. Heaven knows what that even looks like.
Yeah.
And so fidgets, doesn't pay attention, gazing out the window, can't complete a project, blah, 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 all become subjects of a checklist.
Speech,
how they treat other children, all become part of a psychological checklist that teachers and parents can fill out. That is the pathway to an intervention, which ultimately could be a drug like Ritalin or something similar to put your kid on because they've got ADHD or some so-called disorder. And to me, that's the new abuse of children.
Right.
Right. The kid doesn't ask to be drugged.
No.
No. They don't say, I want my Ritalin. And in fact, Ritalin becomes valuable when you're a teenager because you can sell it for $20 a pill on the street. It's a stimulant. And so like I said, the child doesn't ask to be drugged.
Yeah.
They don't ask to be labelled. What they're trying to do is they're trying to fit the kid into a social system of school that tells them to sit still, be quiet, and pay attention, and listen to the teacher and look at the blackboard, right? If you're not capable of that, there's something wrong with you, right? And isn't that an insidious form of control?
Yeah, it is.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it happens every day in this country. You marshal the kids into rooms, into unnatural environments, into unnatural social settings, actually, and say, this is normal, and you need to fit into that. If you don't fit into that, we can now treat you. Most treatment comes, I think, as a byproduct of that super control of our education system. And we've raised these issues time and again. When there's a health check in this country called the before school checks. It's done on 4-year-olds, and it's been around for a while. It's a medical check, but in the middle of it, there's a psychological check of the child with all these questions that I've mentioned about paying attention and so on. And the parent can opt out of that part of the checklist. You say, no, I don't want to assess that. But health clinics are encouraged that the parent does fill out that part of the checklist, right? And because the other part of the before school checks is ears and throat and eyes, that's all good stuff. You want to see if your kid's hard of hearing or poor eyesight or has something wrong with them. But this psychological check is insidious. And so that's a pathway then to an intervention and treatment by the time the kid goes to school. And most parents aren't aware of it. And in fact, the idea, because I did a study of this using their own documents, it's so faulty and their parameters and their assessments are so faulty that the system itself cannot really show that there's anything wrong with that child, of course. It's all manufactured future business at an early age.
Yeah.
And the answer ultimately is medication. You've heard of ADHD drugs? Ritalin.
No.
No, very, very, very popular.
Really?
Oh, yeah, Ritalin.
Kids are on it?
Yeah, totally. That's the go-to drug.
I've heard of antidepressants.
Yeah, no, Ritalin and the ADHD drugs, they are stimulants. They're close to an amphetamine of sorts. So they're like speed, right?
Mm.
But on a young person's body, they slow them down, right? So these kids are sort of slowed down with these powerful drugs in them.
ADHD is like a common thing. It's so common.
Well, it doesn't even need a label.
Yeah,
It's just trying to label human behavior.
yeah, it's just a very common human behavior.
Yeah.
It's
Now they talk about adult ADHD, and they are again prescribing the drugs for that as well. And university students will get themselves a dose of these drugs as well to help them study at night. And it's just all these pharmaceutical approaches to adjusting the mind into what the society is trying to fit us into these boxes, you know, these pegs going into holes. Well, you know, for children, if they can't tolerate sitting in a classroom, paying attention and looking at a blackboard, send them outside, let them run around.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Work on those kind of levels. And in fact, of course, that's so been proven and tried that you don't even have to sort of argue the case. But the education system tends to like engaging the psychiatrist and the drugs and giving them to the children.
Yeah, that's so foreign. Growing up back home in the Emirates, we had none of that rubbish. There was never any interaction between an education environment and a hospital environment.
Yeah.
In terms of anything to do with behavior.
It's a much, I guess, it's really kicked in the 90s here and into the 2000s.
It's so bizarre. We got beaten by the teachers with a stick. That was it.
Right.
We got smacked and we got sent out and run around and we got, you know, parents were told and they'll smack us. That was it. I would rather take that than be on some drugs or something.
Yeah, of course.
You know? Yeah, it's so bizarre. It's so, you know, Elon Musk is building a device called Neuralink. It's a chip that gets drilled into your brain, and it comes with sort of chemical activations. I'd like to think it's not electric shocks,
but I've tried that too, by the way.
Yeah, and it's some of the I think the intentions, what they're trying to do is to stimulate parts of the brain that have gone numb or cells that have died. Let's say you've been in an accident and your legs don't work. This device can sort of stimulate and get things moving again, working again. To me, that's almost like a pathway to a better advanced technology that it can stimulate the brain in a healthier fashion, fix your eyesight, any functions of the brain. If there is any disability, I think that's probably a better approach to getting yourself high on drugs.
Yeah, that's right.
You know,
I don't know too much about that. If you're going to restore a person's ability to walk or...
I think it's 10, 20 years away. It's interesting. Have a look into it.
Yeah,
Neuralink.
Yeah, and I know that the electrical system of the body is too often overlooked in terms of what it can do in terms of a healing process. And you'll find this in various cultures. Acupuncture is probably the first one that comes to mind, that it's actually just stimulating nerve channels around the body with needles as a healing process. So there's different ways and different approaches. And while we are delving into the ultra-modern scientific, what we shouldn't lose sight of is some of these things that have been around for thousands of years that would probably also have a certain workability where they're allowed to really be looked at. The medical profession like to dominate the healing process. And when it comes to psychiatry. Well, I've said to many psychiatrists, you have a very limited toolkit, don't you? They don't like this, by the way. They go, yeah, what do you mean? I said, well, you've got drugs and you've got electric shocks.
Yeah.
That's it. And they sort of look at me as if, we talk to our patients. I said, yeah, you talk them into taking your drugs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you try to convince them that electric shocks are okay.
Yeah.
But that's what they have in their toolkit. And the funny thing is that they just seem to rehash those same ideas. Different drugs, different ways of shocking people, different ways of electric shocking the brain. Is there no other approach? You know, you could go back into ancient, I think it was Greek culture, where they wrapped electric eels around a person's head. You know, I mean, so, you know, come on.
Yeah.
Isn't there something better you could be doing? So,
have you looked into the work of Gabor Mate?
no, certainly heard of him, but
Yeah.
haven't really looked into his work.
Yeah, I mean, he's very much aligned with what you're saying. Point number one, Western psychiatry is toxic. It's causing a huge civilizational risk of a collapse. And then he reintroduces very simple approaches, which is very much strongly aligned with what you're saying, not to cause that problem in the first place. Look for behavior, accepting more behaviors and work with behavior shifts. He's deep into the psychedelics world. He talks a lot about how psychedelics can heal. Talks a lot about that. He's an initiator himself, working with ayahuasca mainly. It's strongly recommend looking into what he's doing. He's just launched a book last year, I think. And he does a lot of content and media online as well for his work. Certainly there is some big movements in the world for alternative approaches and holistic approaches for shifting a lot of things, but you're still fighting the traditional system. It's alive and strong.
Monopoly.
Yeah, it is. Jordan Peterson got threatened to revoke his psychiatric license in Canada because he said something on social media, and they summoned him to a social media training. So it's interesting that you still have those big giants and these associations that will continue to push. So I'm not surprised that your interactions with these people are always interesting and amusing, I would say.
They can be, and they can be very challenging. And but even within those professions, there are more and more, I would say, enlightened people speaking out with other ideas and other modalities that they would rather see being worked with.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, these processes are gradual, they take time, and people, these ideas, they spread from word of mouth, from broadcasts of alternative news usually, and they gain currency. People start looking into these things. They start checking these things out.
Yeah.
And I'll say it now because we're about to have an exhibition.
Sure.
A Citizens Exhibition, a Human Rights Exhibition.
Yes.
It's going to take place in April, starting early April. And it'll be on 153 Broadway in Newmarket near the Rialto.
Yeah.
So we're renting a retail space, and it'll be a display of psychiatry, its history, what it does, how it does it, what those abuses are. And it'll be open to the public for about 3 weeks.
Wow.
So that's our CCHR exhibition. We do this periodically once every few years, and it attracts a lot of attention. And there'll be materials to collect and take away. Some of this stuff can be found on the CCHR website, cchr.org. But there's books and magazines and
Yeah, you got some with you.
DVDs.
Yeah.
Dead Wrong, which is about psychiatric drugs can kill your child.
Of course it can.
And another one here, The Age of Fear. And this one's really interesting because this is also covers psychiatry's essentially in Germany, pre-Holocaust, the psychiatrists were talking about life devoid of value. The first people to see the inside of a Zyklon B gas chamber were mentally ill people, not Jews.
Wow.
They started killing them before they turned those chambers over to the concentration camps. And so in this you have the German Psychiatric Association apologizing for their role in the Holocaust. And that's seriously interesting.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. No, that's exciting that you're doing this exhibition. I'm definitely going to come check it out, and we'll obviously put it out there as well. Just curious, in terms of remedies or alternative ways of healing, if you looked into like CBD oils, marijuana, mushrooms.
You're talking more drugs.
Would you say that they're drugs? Is
of course they are.
A mushroom is a drug?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the magic mushroom thing, it's definitely a drug. If you take too much of it, it'll kill you.
A natural drug.
It's a natural drug, just the same as marijuana is a natural drug.
Yes.
It's still a drug.
Yeah.
And I think it's that idea of the drug approach that then it's the whole basis of the pharmaceuticals is the drug approach. They're chemicalizing drugs. And drugs produce an altered state of mind. And the person who is mentally unwell has already got an altered state of mind. And and there are other ways of dealing with this, and they're quite well documented. But for some reason, there seems to be a body that seems to just go back, just circulate around this idea of drugs. I mean, thalidomide, for example. You know thalidomide?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that produced deformed babies, right? They still want to use thalidomide for other reasons. You would think, why would you even touch that thing? It would be kind of like radioactive in the drug world, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But no, they're still trying to figure out uses for the thalidomide. You know?
And it's all probably commercial reasons. And
Yeah. So why would you do that? Because there's money behind that. If you can monetize it, you can profit from that. You know, there's an African remedy for the person who's mentally unwell. It's an old African remedy. They probably still use it in various parts, which is they just take the person and they just take them for a long walk outside the village. And they just keep walking. And they keep walking until the person comes right, and then they walk them back. You can't monetize that.
Yeah.
Right. In Uganda, for example, they have a mental health program. They've got very few psychiatrists in Uganda. They've got about 20 million population. They've got about, I don't know, less than 100 psychiatrists in that country. Do you know what their mental health program is? Putting volunteer, or they're probably being paid, but grandmothers predominantly, through a program of training of how to go out and talk to people in public places and consult them and console them. Right? They might be in trouble. They might need some sort of help. They might need some kind of sympathy. It's the grandmother program, right? No drugs are involved. This is probably something that's very social. It's very human. And that's their mental health program. Is just taking something that's already there in the society and perhaps facilitating that into how do you help people with that. To me, that's forward thinking.
Yeah.
You know, that's just
Yes, it is.
so
It is.
cuts across all the monopolies and all the
Yeah.
pharmaceuticals and all the rest of it into something that is just called human compassion.
It is.
So, yeah, and it's probably if you open, and this is the other thing too, if you remove the monopoly of psychiatry, you say, look, you guys cannot treat people against their will. That's it. It's got to stop. Then all these other modalities can start to take shape, get involved. You know, you got the Taranaki retreat. Create more retreats like that. Put some money into those programs that grow up out of the community and monetize that. And then you'll start to see what works and what doesn't work and all these alternatives.
Yeah. But it also seems like we can't even get compassion right. You know,
That's right.
we've ruined the concept of being kind. Kiwis don't want to hear those words again.
Be kind because it was politicized. That's why.
It was. And it was used in through a controlling context. You're being controlled and you've been given the single source of truth. You've been mandated that if you want to have a social life, you've got to have vaccine. And then that's all done within the concept of being kind. But
It was a politicized message.
Yeah. But it's ruined. It's caused, it's kind of killed the whole appetite for people wanting to sort of go down the route of being compassionate and kind, because it's you know.
Is it though? I would say that.
Well, it hasn't. I mean, at a human level, we have it.
Yeah.
It's human nature, but the application of it
What if
becomes.
someone came along and says, you know, be kind? You would.
Yeah.
You might associate it with no, that's not good.
No, but also I think it's like when you, it's hard to. I'm saying it's hard to express the human compassion when you are operating within a system.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's hard for a bureaucracy to be compassionate.
And that's why the people, they call you and ask for your advice, and the first thing you say, hey, you just got to avoid doing those issues. It's hard for them to do that because they're so stuck in that
It's
system.
like a new idea.
It is, yeah.
And so for a bureaucracy to be kind, it's taken on the shape of this sort of shapeless entity. It has no compassion. It has no remorse. And therefore it has no feeling. The people that work within that system, of course, they are human. And they might have all those human emotions. But to then have that played out through the organization is seemingly impossible. You talked about an apology earlier. The corporation can't easily apologize because it tries to defend itself. It's too inward looking to be outward about its real compassion. And that's where our social structures of government and bureaucracy tend to defeat us, you see. And that's the challenge, I think, that we have to sort of think about. Because we talk about, you know, we've got a new government. We had an old government. A few years before that, we had a previous government, and so on. And I would maintain that governments don't change very much, right? From one period to the next. I don't think you can point to too many political leaders that have made a huge impact on the planet. The people and groups that tend to make a larger impact in our societies are actually religious people and even artists. And they have a far greater social impact than governments. Governments tend to muddle about trying to control populations. They're not very forward thinking, and they don't really create a lot of change. And I would say philosophers and so forth tend to also be the more inspired people. So we worry about this government or that government or the previous government or what could be the future government or should Donald Trump be elected and so on. And to me, I sort of try and ignore that because we've seen 50 years of governments in this country pretty much try to ignore Lake Alice. Didn't matter who was in power, whether the National or Labour or some kind of.
50 years.
It didn't seem to matter who was sitting in those seats. They all seemed to be like, lizard people. They're just replaced by another lizard person.
The lizard people.
You know what I mean? It was it's like they were interchangeable in a way. And so how do you really create some fundamental change? And I think this is what interests a lot of people, not only us in this area of mental health, but I think it interests a lot of people in a lot of areas. How do you create those fundamental changes? And I don't have any easy answers for that. Like the idea of what's the alternative for psychiatry, I think you've got to open the doors to other ideas. I think you've got to be open to other ideas. I think as soon as we start shutting off and refuse to look at new ideas, we start to limit our possibilities.
Yeah.
I think we can be afraid of new ideas, and I think any society can be afraid of new ideas because they're entrenched in the current ideas. And you would find that no matter where you go in the world, the West tends to be entrenched in the Western ideals. It thinks it's the idea and it's the ideal civilization or something like this, that the Western civilization somehow has reached some kind of ideal. Well, that's utter nonsense.
Yeah, but I think you've got it right. I think your approach and your success with the United Nations and the work that you're doing, I think there's a 30-year vision already at play. Now, from now on, 30, 50-year worth of pathway already set to continue shifting that into much more compassionate, removing the abuse in the first place, more holistic approach, rights to humans to choose if they want to have the drugs or not. And I think that's just exciting. It's inspiring. It will continue to just drive in the right path, which is just incredible stuff. And obviously you've been involved for 30 years in this field, and that experience is coming across. It's been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, it's a pleasure. Yeah. It's really nice to be able to just sit and talk.
Yeah, it's good. It's a fun format, It's just relaxed and just a conversation, and it's not an interview. It's not a quick 5-minute. It's a good opportunity to capture the story, but also share ideas on how we can do things better.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. That's a wrap.